Story 1: The Loop on Interstate 80. Marcus Chen had been driving 18-wheelers for 23 years, hauling everything from electronics to livestock across the continental United States. He'd seen his share of strange things on the road: deer that seemed to materialize out of nowhere, fog banks that swallowed entire stretches of highway, drivers who appeared and disappeared like ghosts in his mirrors. But nothing prepared him for what happened on Interstate 80 through Nebraska in March of 2024. The load was simple enough: industrial machinery parts from Omaha heading west to Sacramento. Marcus had driven this route dozens of times, knew every truck stop, every way station, every place where the state troopers liked to hide. The weather forecast called for clear skies, and he'd timed his departure to avoid the worst of the traffic. Everything was routine. He left Omaha just after sunset, the city lights fading in his mirrors as the highway stretched out before him. The GPS showed 750 miles to his next scheduled stop in Salt Lake City. His CB radio crackled with the usual chatter: drivers warning each other about speed traps, complaining about fuel prices, sharing information about road conditions ahead. Marcus kept one ear on the conversation while his eyes scanned the darkness beyond his headlights. Around midnight, somewhere past Grand Island, the CB went quiet. Not the usual lull in conversation, but a complete absence of sound. No static, no distant voices bleeding through from other channels, nothing. Marcus tapped the radio, checked the power, switched channels. Silence. He glanced at his phone. No signal. That wasn't unusual in some parts of Nebraska, but combined with the dead CB, it felt wrong. The highway ahead was empty. No taillights, no oncoming traffic, no lights from distant farmhouses. Just his headlights cutting through the darkness and the painted lines of the road stretching endlessly forward. Marcus checked his GPS. The screen showed his location on I-80, the blue line of his route extending west. Everything looked normal, but something felt fundamentally off. That's when he noticed the mile marker, 279. He'd passed that same marker 15 minutes ago. Marcus frowned, convinced he'd misread it, but when the next marker appeared in his headlights, it read 278. He was traveling west, but the markers were counting down in the wrong direction. Except they weren't really. The markers should be increasing as he drove west. His mind struggled to make sense of it. He drove for another 20 minutes, watching the mile markers carefully. 279 appeared again, then 278, then 277, then back to 279. The same sequence, repeating. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He'd been driving for nearly an hour since the CB went silent, should have covered 60 or 70 miles, but according to the markers, he was traveling the same 3-mile stretch over and over. The GPS still showed him moving west along I-80, the blue dot progressing normally along the route. But the world outside his windows contradicted it. The same slight curve in the road, the same distance between markers, the same abandoned farmhouse with a collapsed barn. He'd now passed it 7 times. Marcus tried the CB again. Still nothing. He picked up his phone, thinking he'd pull over and try to figure out what was happening, but there was nowhere to pull over. The shoulder had disappeared. The highway was just 2 lanes now, with darkness pressing in on either side. Not the darkness of open plains, but an absolute blackness that seemed to swallow his headlights before they could penetrate more than a few feet. His fuel gauge showed 3/4 of a tank. That was wrong, too. He'd burned at least 1/8 of a tank since leaving the last truck stop, but the needle hadn't moved. Time on the dashboard clock read 12:47 a.m. He was certain it had read 12:47 the last time he looked 15 minutes ago. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Every instinct told him to stop, to pull over, to figure this out. But there was nowhere to stop, and somehow he knew that stopping was the worst thing he could do. Mile marker 279 appeared again. The abandoned farmhouse with the collapsed barn, the slight curve in the road. He counted his heartbeats, trying to measure time since his clock had stopped. The same curve, the same farmhouse, the same markers. Then something changed. In the distance, he saw lights. Not the lights of another vehicle, but stationary lights along the right side of the road. As he drew closer, Marcus made out the familiar shape of a truck stop. Pumps, a convenience store, a parking area. The neon signs glowed in colors that seemed too vivid, too saturated. He hadn't passed any truck stop on this stretch before, and he knew this section of I-80 well. There shouldn't be a truck stop here. But his fuel gauge still read 3/4 full, but his bladder was pressing, and he desperately wanted to talk to another human being to confirm he wasn't losing his mind. Marcus eased his rig toward the exit. The truck stop was empty. No other vehicles in the lot, no attendant visible through the store windows, no lights on inside except for the neon signs that cast everything in shades of red and blue. Marcus parked his rig and climbed down from the cab. The asphalt felt solid under his boots. The air was still without even a hint of wind. No sound of distant traffic, no insects, nothing. He approached the store entrance. Through the glass, he could see shelves stocked with merchandise, a counter with a register, everything in its place. But no people. He tried the door. Locked. Marcus cupped his hands against the glass and peered inside. Everything looked normal. Too normal. Like a stage set waiting for actors. He walked around. The building. The restrooms were on the outside, accessed through separate doors. Marcus tried them, also locked. Behind the building, he found the dumpsters, the employee parking spaces, a propane cage, everything exactly as it should be at a truck stop, but abandoned. Or not abandoned, prepared, waiting. Marcus returned to his truck, climbed into the cab, and locked the doors. His hands were shaking now. He tried the ignition. The engine roared to life immediately. The dashboard clock still read 12:47 a.m. He put the rig in gear and pulled back onto the highway. Mile marker 279, the abandoned farmhouse, the slight curve. His headlights illuminated the same stretch of road he'd been traveling for. How long now? Hours? He'd lost count of how many times he'd passed these same landmarks. Something was different this time. In his rearview mirror, back at the truck stop he'd just left, he saw a figure standing in the parking lot. Tall, motionless, watching his truck pull away. Marcus's blood went cold. The figure hadn't been there moments ago, he was certain of it. He pressed harder on the accelerator. The speedometer climbed, 65, 70, 75. The mile markers continued their impossible sequence. 279, 278, 277, 279. And in his mirror, the truck stop remained visible, neither getting closer nor farther away, the figure still standing in the parking lot. Then he saw other trucks, 3 of them parked along the shoulder that had reappeared. Hazard lights flashing. Marcus felt a surge of relief. Other drivers. He wasn't alone. Whatever this was, other people were experiencing it too. He slowed, preparing to pull over, and that's when he saw the trucks more clearly. They were old, not vintage, but weathered, decades out of date. The models were from the 1970s and 80s, and they were empty. Doors open, cabs dark, no signs of the drivers. Marcus's relief turned to dread. He accelerated past the abandoned trucks, his mind racing. How long had they been there? Were the drivers still somewhere on this impossible stretch of highway, trapped like he was? Or had something else happened to them? The road began to change. The pavement looked different, older, more cracked and weathered. The painted lines were faded. And the mile markers, when they appeared, showed numbers that didn't make sense. 279, then 315, then 192, then 279 again. Not just repeating, but jumping randomly, as if he were being shunted between different sections of highway that occupied the same space. His CB radio suddenly burst to life with a screech of static that made Marcus jump. Through the noise, he heard voices, fragments of conversations, calls for help. Someone reciting numbers, someone else crying. The voices overlapped, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all talking at once. Marcus recognized the cadence of trucker communication, but the words were garbled, distorted. He reached for the CB to respond, but before he could key the microphone, the radio went silent again. The sudden absence of sound was worse than the cacophony had been. The highway ahead split, not a normal fork or exit, but a literal split. The road divided into two identical paths that ran parallel for a short distance before diverging at impossible angles, one curving up into the darkness above, the other descending below the level of the original road. Both paths looked identical. Both showed mile marker 279 in the distance. Marcus had no choice but to choose. He kept the wheel straight, taking the path that continued at ground level. The other path disappeared from his mirrors as if it had never existed. Time felt different now, not stopped but elastic. Minutes stretched and compressed. His clock still showed 12:47, but Marcus could feel time passing in his body, the growing stiffness in his back, the increasing pressure in his bladder, the exhaustion creeping into his muscles. Then, without warning or transition, the world snapped back. The CB radio exploded with normal conversation, drivers discussing a construction delay near North Platte, someone asking about weather conditions ahead. Marcus's phone showed full signal. The GPS indicated he was approaching mile marker 320, and when the marker appeared in his headlights, it read 320. His dashboard clock jumped forward to 3:23 a.m. Nearly 3 hours had passed since the loop began, but Marcus had no idea how far he'd actually traveled or where he'd been. His fuel gauge now showed half a tank, exactly what it should show after 3 hours of driving. Marcus pulled off at the next exit, a legitimate truck stop with dozens of other rigs in the parking lot. His legs trembled as he climbed down from the cab. Inside the store, the fluorescent lights were harsh and bright and wonderfully normal. The attendant was a middle-aged woman who smiled at him tiredly and asked if he needed anything. He bought coffee he didn't drink and stood in the parking lot for 20 minutes, watching other trucks come and go, confirming that the world was operating normally again. Other drivers walked past him and he wanted to grab them to ask if they'd ever experienced anything like what he'd just been through. But he didn't. He knew how it would sound. Marcus completed his delivery to Sacramento on schedule. He filed his logs, reported no issues, and accepted his next assignment. But he requested routes that avoided Interstate 80 through Nebraska. His dispatcher didn't ask why. In the weeks that followed, Marcus heard stories from other drivers, rumors about a stretch of I-80 where trucks disappeared for hours, where time didn't work right, where the road itself seemed alive and hungry. He never drove that section of highway again, but sometimes late at night on other roads he'd see his dashboard clock stutter, see a mile marker that didn't quite fit the sequence, hear strange fragments of conversation on his CB. And he'd grip the wheel tighter and push through, terrified that whatever had caught him once was still out there, waiting for him to drop his guard. Marcus stopped sleeping normally. He'd doze in 15-minute increments at truck stops, always with the engine running, always ready to move. Other drivers commented on how tired he looked. He started carrying a notebook, documenting every mile marker, every turn, every landmark, obsessively recording his position to confirm he was actually moving forward through space. 3 months after the incident, Marcus Chen sold his truck and quit driving. He works at a warehouse now, loading and unloading cargo for other drivers. He never tells them why he stopped driving long haul. But sometimes when a trucker mentions running I-80 through Nebraska, Marcus feels his chest tighten, and he walks away before he can hear the rest of the story. The loop is still out there. Marcus knows it. Waiting on some stretch of highway that exists and doesn't exist, catching drivers who happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong moment when the world's edges come unstitched. He escaped once. He won't risk it again. Story 2. The facility that wasn't there. Jennifer Walsh had driven refrigerated trucks for 15 years, specializing in pharmaceutical deliveries that required precise temperature control and strict schedules. She prided herself on never missing a delivery window, never letting her cargo temperature fluctuate outside acceptable ranges, never taking shortcuts. In September of 2023, that perfect record led her to accept a rush delivery that would change everything. The pickup was in Trenton, New Jersey, a pharmaceutical warehouse she'd delivered to dozens of times. The cargo was experimental medications being transported to a research facility in Asheville, North Carolina. Time-sensitive, temperature-critical, and paying triple the normal rate for priority delivery. Jennifer accepted immediately. The warehouse manager seemed nervous when he handed her the paperwork. The delivery address was handwritten, not printed like usual. The facility name was something generic, Cascade Research Center, that Jennifer didn't recognize. When she asked about it, the manager just said it was a new client and she should follow the GPS coordinates exactly. Jennifer loaded the cargo, checked the refrigeration unit twice, and programmed the GPS coordinates into her system. The route took her south through Virginia, then west into North Carolina toward Asheville. Standard enough. She departed Trenton at 4:00 p.m., planning to arrive around midnight. The drive was uneventful through New Jersey and Virginia. Jennifer stopped once for fuel and a quick meal, checked her cargo temperature, perfect at 38 degrees Fahrenheit, and continued south. As she crossed into North Carolina, she noticed the GPS route diverging from the interstates, directing her onto smaller highways, then county roads. This wasn't unusual for specialized research facilities. Many were deliberately located in remote areas for security or zoning reasons. But as the roads grew narrower and the forests pressed closer on either side, Jennifer felt the first prickle of unease. Her GPS showed 20 miles to the destination. The road was barely 2 lanes now, winding through dense pine forest. No houses, no other vehicles, no road signs. Just endless trees and the tunnel of her headlights cutting through the darkness. At 10 miles out, the pavement ended. The road became gravel, then packed dirt. Jennifer slowed her rig, checking the GPS repeatedly. The blue line insisted she was on the correct route. The coordinates matched the delivery instructions. But this didn't feel right. At 5 miles, she reached a gate, heavy steel, 12 feet high, stretching across the road with chain-link fencing extending into the forest on both sides. A keypad was mounted on a post beside the gate. Jennifer stopped her truck and climbed down. There were no signs identifying the facility. No warnings about private property or security. The keypad had a small LED screen that glowed green in the darkness. Jennifer checked her paperwork. At the bottom of the delivery instructions, she found a 6-digit code. She entered it. The gate rolled open silently. Too silently. No motor sound, no chain rattle, just smooth movement. The LED screen flashed blue and displayed a message. Proceed to receiving. Jennifer returned to her truck, drove through, and watched in her mirrors as the gate closed behind her. The road beyond was paved again, perfect asphalt that looked freshly laid. Trees lined both sides, but they seemed wrong. Too uniform in size, too precisely spaced, like a planted barrier rather than natural forest. Jennifer's unease deepened into genuine anxiety. Her CB radio was silent, no signal on her phone. The GPS showed her approaching the destination, but the satellite view had disappeared, replaced by a gray blank area with just her blue position dot and the red destination marker. The facility appeared suddenly around a curve, a cluster of low buildings all identical, windowless concrete structures with flat roofs and steel doors. Bright floodlights illuminated everything with a harsh white glow that seemed to flatten the landscape. A parking area held 2 other trucks and 3 unmarked white vans. Jennifer parked in the designated receiving area and waited. The delivery instructions said someone would meet her. The facility was eerily quiet. No sounds of machinery, no people visible, no activity at all despite the bright lights suggesting operation. After 5 minutes, a door opened in the nearest building. A man emerged wearing a white lab coat and carrying a tablet. He walked to Jennifer's truck with precise, measured steps. Everything about him seemed calculated. His pace, his posture, even the way he held the tablet at exactly chest height. Jennifer rolled down her window. The man looked up at her and she saw his face was completely neutral. Not unfriendly, not friendly. Blank. Jennifer Walsh? His voice was similarly flat. That's me. I've got your delivery from Trenton, pharmaceuticals, temperature controlled. She held up her paperwork. The man nodded once. Back your vehicle to Bay 3. He pointed to a loading dock without doors, just 3 numbered openings in the side of the building. We'll handle the unloading. Jennifer felt every instinct screaming at her to leave, to refuse the delivery, to turn around and drive back through that gate. But this was her job. The cargo needed to be delivered. She'd signed for it, and she'd never failed to complete a delivery. She backed her rig carefully to Bay 3. The man stood watching, still holding his tablet, still perfectly motionless, except when absolutely necessary. As Jennifer aligned her truck with the bay, she glanced in her side mirror and saw other figures emerging from the building. 4 of them, also in white lab coats, also moving with that same precise mechanical gait. They worked efficiently, unloading the cargo without speaking, without making unnecessary movements. Jennifer watched from her cab, her hands gripping the steering wheel. Something was profoundly wrong here, but she couldn't articulate what. Nothing overtly threatening was happening. The delivery was proceeding normally, and yet every cell in her body was telling her to run. The unloading took 10 minutes. The figures carried the pharmaceutical containers into the building and disappeared. The man with the tablet approached Jennifer's window again. He held up the tablet, showing a digital signature pad. Confirm delivery? Jennifer hesitated. I need a copy of the receipt for my records. You'll receive digital confirmation within 24 hours. The man's expression didn't change. Sign here. Something in his tone, the absolute flatness, the absence of any human inflection, made Jennifer's decision. She started her engine. I need a physical receipt, company policy. If you can't provide that, I can't confirm the delivery. The man's head tilted slightly like a dog hearing a strange sound. You must confirm the delivery. Not without a receipt. Jennifer put the truck in gear. The man's eyes, Jennifer finally looked directly at them, were wrong. The pupils were perfectly circular, too large, and they didn't reflect light properly. You cannot leave without confirming the delivery. Jennifer released the air brakes. Behind her, she heard movement. In her mirrors, she saw the other figures emerging from the building again, at least a dozen of them now, all converging on her truck with that same mechanical precision. She punched the accelerator. The truck lurched forward away from the loading bay. The figures didn't run after her, but they changed direction in perfect unison, tracking her movement. Jennifer swung the truck around in the parking area, tires kicking up gravel, and headed back toward the road. The gate was closed. Jennifer slammed her fist against the horn, but there was no response, no guard station, no way to open it from this side. In her mirrors, the figures were approaching, walking steadily, unhurried. They knew she was trapped. Jennifer scanned the fence line desperately. The chain link extended into the forest, but forests meant trees, and trees meant the fence had to end somewhere or accommodate the terrain. She turned off the main road, driving along the fence line, her truck's off-road capabilities being tested as the ground became rougher. Half a mile from the facility, she found what she was looking for, a drainage culvert where a small creek passed under the fence. The gap was barely large enough for her truck, and the clearance would be inches at best. Jennifer didn't hesitate. She angled her rig toward the culvert, ignoring the scraping sound of metal against concrete as she forced the truck through. Branches scraped against her cab. The refrigeration unit on her trailer clipped the fence post, setting off alarms. But she was through, crashing through underbrush back toward what she hoped was the road she'd come in on. It took her 20 minutes of rough driving through the forest before she found the dirt road again. Another 30 minutes before she reached pavement. Her truck was damaged, scratches and dents covering the cab and trailer, the refrigeration unit's alarm still wailing, but she was out. Jennifer drove for 3 hours straight, not stopping until she reached the outskirts of Asheville proper, a populated area with gas stations and traffic lights and normal human activity. She pulled into a well-lit truck stop and sat shaking in her cab for 15 minutes before she could force herself to get out. She called her company, reported that the delivery location was suspicious, that she'd felt threatened, that she'd left without confirming delivery. She expected anger, expected to be fired. Instead, her dispatcher was silent for a long moment, then said, "Come back to home base. Don't talk to anyone else about this." Jennifer drove back to Trenton. When she arrived, the warehouse manager who'd given her the delivery was gone. A new manager claimed there was no record of the shipment. Jennifer's truck was quickly repaired by company mechanics who didn't ask questions. Her logs for that night were altered to show a different, routine delivery. 2 weeks later, Jennifer received a settlement offer from the company, a year's salary in exchange for signing a non-disclosure agreement and resigning. The paperwork mentioned nothing specific about what had happened, just vague language about an incident during a delivery and mutual agreement to part ways. Jennifer signed. She took the money and started working for a local delivery company, short hauls only, nothing that required her to drive into remote areas. But she couldn't let it go. She tried finding the location again, using the GPS coordinates from that night. They pointed to empty forest. No facility, no buildings, no gate. She searched for Cascade Research Center online. Nothing. She contacted other drivers, asking carefully worded questions about strange delivery locations in North Carolina. Most ignored her, but a few responded with their own stories. Facilities that appeared and disappeared. Delivery locations that didn't exist according to any map. Cargo that felt wrong. Jennifer started documenting everything. She created a database of suspicious delivery requests, comparing addresses and coordinates, looking for patterns. Other drivers contributed anonymously. The map she built showed clusters of impossible locations across the country, places where drivers were sent to deliver cargo to facilities that officially didn't exist. She never found out what she'd delivered that night, or what the facility was, or who those people were. But she knows she was meant to leave her truck there to confirm the delivery and then, what? Disappear? Be recruited? Become one of those blank-faced figures in white coats? Jennifer Walsh no longer drives long-haul trucks. She works locally, keeps regular hours, and always makes sure someone knows exactly where she's going. But she maintains her database, adding new reports from other drivers, mapping the invisible infrastructure of facilities that exist in the spaces between legitimate geography. She knows she stumbled into something that night, some operation or experiment or installation that functions outside normal channels. And she knows that the gate closing behind her wasn't meant to open again, that her cargo was valuable not for what it contained, but for what it would lure to that remote location. Sometimes Jennifer wonders about the other trucks she saw parked at that facility. Where were their drivers? Did they confirm their deliveries and never leave? Are they still there in those windowless buildings doing whatever work those blank-faced figures do? She'll never know, but she makes sure other drivers have access to her database, can check suspicious delivery addresses before accepting them. It's not much, but it's something. A warning system for a danger that officially doesn't exist. The facility is still out there. Jennifer is certain of it. Maybe not at the same location. These places seem to move, to exist temporarily and then disappear. But somewhere on some back road in some remote forest, a gate is waiting to close behind another unsuspecting driver. Story 3: The Hitchhiker Who Wouldn't Leave. Daniel Morrison had been driving trucks for 31 years, and in all that time he'd never picked up a hitchhiker. It was one of his rules drilled into him during his early days. Never pick up strangers, never leave your cargo unattended, never take routes you haven't researched. Simple rules that had kept him safe through 3 decades of long-haul driving. In July of 2022, Daniel broke his rule. He still doesn't know why. Or maybe he does, and that's what haunts him most. The run was routine, machinery parts from Detroit to Denver. Daniel had driven this route hundreds of times, usually took I-80 west through Iowa and Nebraska, but road construction had the interstate backed up for miles, and his GPS offered an alternate route through rural Wisconsin and Minnesota before cutting south into Nebraska. It was just after dawn when Daniel saw the hitchhiker. Young man, maybe 25, standing on the shoulder with his thumb out. Wearing jeans and a gray hoodie, carrying a small backpack. Nothing remarkable about him except that he was the only person Daniel had seen in the past hour. No other vehicles, no houses, just empty farmland stretching to the horizon. Daniel drove past, kept his eyes on the road, maintained his rule. But something made him look in his mirror, and when he did, the hitchhiker was still standing there, arm outstretched, watching Daniel's truck recede into the distance. And Daniel felt something he couldn't explain. A compulsion, almost a physical pull to stop. He told himself it was just sympathy. The guy was stranded in the middle of nowhere. It was already getting hot. What harm could it do to give him a ride to the next town? Daniel slowed his rig and pulled onto the shoulder. In his mirror, he watched the hitchhiker pick up his backpack and walk toward the truck. Unhurried, confident, like he'd known all along that Daniel would stop. The young man climbed into the passenger seat with a nod of thanks. "Appreciate it. Name's Michael." He settled into the seat, put his backpack at his feet, and looked straight ahead at the road. "Daniel, how far you going?" Daniel put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the highway. "Same direction as you." Michael's voice was pleasant, unremarkable. "I'll know when to get out." It was an odd answer, but Daniel let it pass. He'd given the guy a ride. He didn't need his life story. They drove in silence for a while. Daniel kept the CB radio low, monitoring the usual chatter. Michael sat perfectly still, hands folded in his lap, watching the road. After about 30 minutes, Daniel tried making conversation. "Where you from, Michael?" "Lots of places." Michael turned to look at him, and Daniel noticed his eyes for the first time. Pale gray, almost colorless. "Where are you from, Daniel?" "Ohio originally. Been driving long enough I don't really have a home base anymore." Daniel felt uncomfortable under that gray stare and focused back on the road. "That must be lonely." Michael's tone held no sympathy, just observation. Driving all these roads, never staying anywhere, never really connecting with anyone. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. There was something wrong with this conversation, with the way Michael spoke. Too perceptive, too direct. "It's the job. I chose it." "Did you?" Michael tilted his head. "Or did it choose you?" Before Daniel could respond, his CB radio erupted with static. Through the noise. He heard someone speaking, but the words were distorted, reversed sounding. He reached to adjust the frequency, but Michael's hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. "Don't!" Michael's grip was cold and impossibly strong. "You'll want to hear this." The static resolved into a voice, Daniel's voice, having a conversation with someone. But Daniel wasn't speaking. He was hearing himself talk about the cargo he was carrying, the route he was taking, his delivery schedule. The conversation was happening in real time, his voice responding to questions from another voice that Daniel also recognized. Michael's. "What the hell is this?" Daniel tried to pull his arm free, but Michael held on. "This is what's happening right now, Daniel. On another road in another version of this trip. You made a different choice there. You didn't pick me up." Michael's gray eyes were fixed on him. "Do you want to know what happens to that version of you?" Daniel didn't answer, couldn't answer. On the CB, his other self's voice suddenly cut off mid-sentence. There was a sound of screeching metal, breaking glass, screaming. Then silence. Michael released Daniel's wrist. "You see, you were supposed to pick me up. The timelines where they don't end well for you." Daniel's heart was hammering. His mouth was dry. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. He was hallucinating or dreaming or having some kind of medical emergency. "Who are you?" "I told you I'm Michael." The hitchhiker smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm the choice you made. I'm the path you're on now. And you can't unchoose me, Daniel. That's not how this works." Daniel pulled the truck over, slammed it into park. "Get out. Now." Michael didn't move. "We're not at my stop yet." "I don't care where your stop is. Get the hell out of my truck." Daniel's voice was shaking. "No." Michael's voice remained calm, reasonable. "Because if I get out now, you'll try to drive away. You'll try to undo the choice. And that will split the timeline again. And Daniel, you've already accumulated so many splits, you can't afford another one." Daniel grabbed the door handle, planning to get out himself, to flag down another vehicle, to get away from this thing that looked like a young man but wasn't. But when he looked out the window, the landscape had changed. They were no longer on a rural Wisconsin highway. The road stretched through a barren wasteland, cracked earth, dead trees, a sky that churned with dark clouds that moved too fast. "What did you do?" Daniel whispered. "I didn't do anything. You did. Every choice, every decision, every time you turned left instead of right. You created this. All of us, all the Michaels in all the timelines, we're just the manifestations of your choices." Michael gestured at the dead landscape. "This is what's underneath all those other roads you drive. This is the foundation." Daniel closed his eyes, tried to force himself awake. This was a nightmare. Had to be. He'd fallen asleep at the wheel, pulled over and dozed off. This wasn't happening. But when he opened his eyes, Michael was still there, and the wasteland remained outside his windows. "What do you want from me?" "Want?" Michael seemed to consider this. "I don't want anything, Daniel. I'm just along for the ride. I exist because you chose to pick me up. I'll stop existing when we reach my destination, that's all." "Where is your destination?" "The end." Michael pointed ahead where the road vanished into a bank of fog so thick it looked solid. "Right there." Daniel looked at his dashboard. The speedometer read 0. They were parked. But the view outside was moving, the road flowing past as if they were traveling at highway speed. The fog bank drew closer. "What happens when we reach it?" Daniel heard the fear in his own voice. "You find out which timeline you're really in." Michael's smile widened. "Whether you're the Daniel who made the right choice or one of the thousands who didn't." The fog enveloped the truck. Visibility dropped to nothing. Daniel couldn't see the hood of his own rig, couldn't see the road, couldn't see anything except the gray murk pressing against his windshield. The only clear thing was Michael, sitting in the passenger seat, perfectly visible as if illuminated by a light source that didn't exist. Then, without transition, they were through. The fog vanished. They were back on a normal highway. Pavement, lane markings, a green road sign indicating the next town was 15 miles ahead. Sunlight streamed through the windshield. Everything looked completely ordinary. Except Michael was gone. The passenger seat was empty. His backpack wasn't on the floor. There was no indication anyone had ever been there. Daniel pulled over immediately, his whole body shaking. He checked the cab, searched for any sign that Michael had been real. Nothing. He grabbed his phone, checked the time. 2 hours had passed since he'd picked up the hitchhiker, but it felt like minutes. He pulled up his route on the GPS. According to the system, he deviated from his planned course, taking a series of back roads that added 50 miles to his trip. But Daniel had no memory of turning off the highway. No memory of the past 2 hours except for the conversation with Michael and the journey through that impossible wasteland. Daniel got out of the truck and walked around the rig on unsteady legs. The truck was fine. No damage, no signs of having driven through anything other than normal roads. His cargo was secure. Everything was as it should be. But on the passenger door at hand height, there was a handprint in the dust. Small, precise, the fingers impossibly long. Daniel stared at it, reached out to touch it, then pulled his hand back. He left the print there, got back in his truck, and drove. He completed the delivery to Denver without further incident, filed his logs, accepted his next assignment, tried to convince himself he'd hallucinated the entire encounter. Stress, fatigue, maybe a mild seizure. There had to be a medical explanation. But over the following weeks, Daniel noticed changes. Sometimes when he drove past a hitchhiker, he'd see Michael's face superimposed over theirs for just a moment. Sometimes his CB would burst with static and he'd hear fragments of conversations he didn't remember having. Sometimes the road ahead would shimmer and he'd see that wasteland underneath like a double exposure. And sometimes, always in his peripheral vision, he'd see someone in his passenger seat. When he turned to look directly, no one was there, but the presence remained. The sense that Michael was still with him, still riding along, waiting for something. Daniel started taking different routes, avoiding the areas where he'd picked up Michael. It didn't matter. The presence followed. The glimpses of that other landscape continued. The feeling that he was somehow living in multiple timelines simultaneously, that every choice he made was splitting off new versions of himself, and some of those versions were ending badly. He saw a doctor, clean bill of health, saw a therapist. They talked about stress, about the isolation of long-haul trucking, about existential anxiety. The therapist prescribed medication. Daniel took it religiously. The symptoms continued. 6 months after picking up Michael, Daniel Morrison quit trucking. He'd devoted his entire adult life to the job, had no other skills, no savings to speak of. But he couldn't keep driving those highways, couldn't risk another encounter with whatever Michael had been. He took a job at a distribution center, sorting packages, working inside where the walls were solid, and the only roads were the aisles between shelves. He never told anyone what had happened. They'd think he was crazy. Some days he thought he was crazy, but on his route home from work, a simple 5-mile drive through suburban streets, Daniel sometimes sees the fog bank ahead. It never gets closer, always remains on the horizon, but it's there, waiting. And he knows that Michael is still in that fog, still riding along, still waiting for them to reach the destination. Daniel checks his mirrors obsessively now. He varies his route home every day. He never picks up hitchhikers, won't even make eye contact with people standing on the side of the road. Because he knows that every choice creates timelines, and in some of those timelines he's still driving. Still picking up passengers. Still heading toward that fog bank. And in one of those timelines, maybe in all of them, he'll eventually reach the end. He'll find out which Daniel he really is, the one who made the right choice, or one of the thousands who didn't. The handprint on his passenger door, preserved now under a coat of wax that Daniel can't bring himself to wash off, is a reminder that the choice has already been made. He just doesn't know yet what it means. Story 4. The Radio Signal. Patricia Sullivan had been a trucker for 18 years, specializing in overnight runs that paid premium rates. She preferred driving at night, less traffic, cooler temperatures, and a certain peace that came with having the highway mostly to herself. Her CB radio handle was Night Owl, and she was known among other drivers for her steady presence on the radio, always ready with information about road conditions or a friendly voice during the lonely hours. In November of 2023, Patricia was running a load of electronics from Phoenix to Boise. She left Phoenix at 8:00 p.m., planning to drive through the night and arrive by morning. The route took her north through Nevada on Highway 95, a long, isolated stretch that cut through desert and mountain ranges with minimal services. Around 2:00 a.m., Patricia was somewhere north of Tonopah when her CB radio picked up a strange signal. It started as static, normal enough, but then resolved into a voice, a woman's voice, speaking in a monotone. "Junction 7, repeat, Junction 7. Patricia keyed her microphone. "This is Night Owl, who's calling?" No response. The voice continued. "Junction 7, repeat, Junction 7. Patricia checked her GPS. There was no Junction 7 on her route. Highway 95 was a simple north-south road through this section with only occasional dirt roads branching off into the desert. She switched CB channels. The voice followed her. Same message, same monotone on every channel. "Junction 7, repeat, Junction 7. Patricia felt the first stirring of unease. In nearly 2 decades of driving, she'd heard all kinds of strange things on the CB. Pranks, interference from skip signals bouncing off the atmosphere, even occasional number stations bleeding through from shortwave frequencies. But this was different. The voice was too clear, too persistent, and it seemed to be directed at her specifically. She tried her CB again. "This is Night Owl to any driver on 95 north of Tonopah. Anyone else hearing this signal?" The voice cut off abruptly. Silence filled the cab. Patricia waited, listening. After a full minute, she tried again. "Night Owl calling. Anyone out there?" A different voice responded, male, panicked, distorted. "Don't stop at Junction 7. Whatever you do, don't stop." "Who is this? What's Junction 7? Patricia's pulse quickened. "It's not a real place, it's—" The voice dissolved into static. When it cleared, the woman's monotone had returned. "Junction 7, repeat, Junction 7. Patricia's headlights illuminated empty highway stretching ahead. No other vehicles, no lights from distant towns, just desert scrub and the occasional Joshua tree throwing strange shadows. She checked her mirrors. No one behind her either. The GPS showed nothing unusual, just Highway 95 continuing north for another 60 miles before the next town. But Patricia's instincts, honed by 18 years of night driving, were screaming that something was wrong. She considered pulling over, waiting for dawn. Maybe letting other traffic catch up so she wasn't alone on this stretch. But pulling over in the desert at night was its own risk. Better to keep moving, to get through this section and reach civilization. The voice on the CB changed cadence. "Approaching Junction 7, prepare to exit Junction 7. "I'm not exiting anywhere," Patricia said aloud to herself. But even as she spoke, she saw lights ahead, the distinct glow of a rest area or truck stop, incongruous in this empty stretch of highway. As she drew closer, Patricia made out details. It looked like a standard rest area. Parking lot, restroom facilities, picnic tables, all illuminated by harsh sodium lights. A green highway sign appeared in her headlights. Rest area 1 mile. But Patricia's GPS showed no rest area here. The map was blank. And the voice on the CB was now insistent. Exit at Junction 7, required stop. Exit at Junction 7. Patricia gripped the wheel tighter and maintained her speed. She wasn't stopping. Whatever this was, she was driving through it. The rest area approached. Patricia could see more details now. 3 trucks parked in the lot, their running lights on. The restroom building looked new, clean, well-maintained. Everything appeared perfectly normal except for one detail. There were no people. No drivers visible in the trucks, no one using the facilities, no movement at all. And then Patricia noticed something else. The 3 parked trucks were identical to each other. Same make, same model, same color scheme. All with the same company logo on their sides. A logo Patricia didn't recognize. The CB radio shrieked with sudden volume. Exit now! Junction 7, exit now! Patricia accelerated past the rest area, her speedometer climbing to 80. In her mirrors, she watched the sodium lights recede. The voice on the CB became garbled, angry-sounding. Non-compliance. Junction 7, non-compliance. Then her truck's engine coughed. The dashboard lights flickered. Patricia felt her speed dropping despite her foot hard on the accelerator. No, 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 she muttered, watching her speedometer fall, 70, 60, 50. The rest area remained visible in her mirrors, and despite driving away from it for 2 minutes, it didn't seem any farther away. Patricia checked her GPS frantically. The blue dot showing her position was stuttering, jumping backward, then forward, then backward again. Her engine died completely. The truck coasted to a stop on the shoulder. In her mirrors, the rest area's lights seemed brighter now, closer, though Patricia was certain she'd driven at least a mile past it. She tried to restart the engine. Nothing, not even the starter turning over. The electrical system was completely dead, no dashboard lights, no headlights, nothing. Her CB radio somehow remained active. Return to Junction 7, mandatory stop, return to Junction 7. Patricia grabbed her flashlight and her phone. No, cell signal, but the phone still worked as a flashlight. She climbed down from the cab, every nerve screaming at her to stay inside, lock the doors, wait for help. But help from whom? She hadn't seen another vehicle in hours. The desert air was cold and completely still. No wind, no insect sounds, no distant highway noise. Patricia walked around her truck, checking for obvious problems. Everything looked normal. Tires fine, no leaking fluids, no visible damage. In the distance behind her, the rest area lights pulsed once like a heartbeat. Then they began moving. Not the lights themselves, but the entire rest area sliding along the highway toward her truck. Impossible but unmistakable. The building, the parking lot, the 3 identical trucks, all of it gliding smoothly in her direction. Patricia's blood turned to ice. She ran back to her truck, climbed into the cab, locked the doors. The rest area continued its approach, now less than half a mile away. On the CB, the voice had changed again. Now it was the panicked male voice she'd heard earlier. You have to go to it. If it comes to you, it's worse. Trust me. Walk to Junction 7. Don't let it reach your truck. What happens if it reaches my truck? Patricia's voice shook. You become one of the drivers in the parking lot. You're there, but you're not there. You're driving, but you're stopped. The voice cut off. Patricia looked at the rest area. It was less than a quarter-mile away now, still moving. She could see more details. The 3 identical trucks weren't empty. There were figures in the cabs, silhouettes of drivers sitting motionless behind their steering wheels. She made a decision. Patricia grabbed her emergency kit, her paperwork, anything important and portable. She climbed down from her truck and started walking toward the rest area. If it was going to catch her anyway, she'd meet it on her terms. As she walked, The rest area stopped moving. It simply halted, instantly motionless, like someone had pressed a pause button. Patricia continued forward, her flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. She reached the parking lot. Up close, the rest area looked even more wrong. The surfaces were too smooth, the angles too perfect. The picnic tables were all identical, positioned at precisely equal distances. The restroom building had doors but no handles, no signs indicating which was for men or women. Patricia approached one of the parked trucks. The driver was visible through the windshield, a man, middle-aged, wearing a cap and flannel shirt. He sat with his hands on the steering wheel, eyes straight ahead, not moving, not breathing as far as Patricia could tell. She knocked on the driver's door. No response. Knocked harder. Nothing. The driver's eyes didn't blink, didn't shift. He was like a mannequin or a paused video. Patricia checked the other two trucks. Same thing. Drivers frozen in their cabs, perfectly still, not quite real. The CB voice spoke again, but now it was coming from all around her, not from any radio. Choose your position, Patricia Sullivan. Choose which truck you will drive forever. I'm not choosing anything. Patricia's voice was steadier than she felt. I'm leaving. There is no leaving Junction 7. There is only arrival. All drivers arrive. All drivers stop. All drivers remain. Patricia walked past the frozen trucks, past the too-perfect restroom building, toward the far side of the parking lot where the rest area transitioned back into highway. The voice followed. You cannot exit without choosing. Choose your truck. Choose your route. Choose your eternity. I already chose my route, Patricia said. Phoenix to Boise. That's where I'm going. She stepped off the parking lot onto the highway beyond. The asphalt felt different under her boots, less solid, almost spongy. She kept walking, putting distance between herself and Junction 7. Behind her, she heard engines starting, all three trucks firing up simultaneously. Patricia glanced back. The trucks were pulling out of the parking spaces, turning, lining up behind each other, following her. She ran. Her emergency kit banged against her side, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly. The trucks accelerated, their headlights flooding the highway, casting her shadow long in front of her. Patricia didn't know what would happen if they caught her. She didn't want to find out. She ran harder, her breath coming in gasps, her legs burning. Then she saw lights ahead, real lights, vehicle lights. A car was approaching from the north, a simple civilian vehicle, the most beautiful thing Patricia had ever seen. She waved her arms, stepped into the middle of the highway, praying they would stop. The car slowed. Patricia risked a glance behind her. The three trucks had stopped, frozen in place. Their headlights dimmed and went out. As she watched, they began fading, becoming transparent like ghosts caught in sunlight. The car stopped beside her, an elderly couple, tourists, looking alarmed at this woman standing in the middle of Highway 95 at 3 a.m. Patricia barely registered their questions. She looked back at where Junction 7 had been. Empty highway. No rest area, no trucks, no sodium lights. Just darkness and desert. The couple gave her a ride to the next town, listened to her stammered explanation about truck trouble, insisted on staying with her while she called for a tow. Patricia's truck was located right where she'd left it, 20 miles south. The tow truck driver reported that it started right up, no problems at all. Patricia completed her delivery to Boise, filed her logs, and took 3 days off. She researched Highway 95, looking for reports of rest areas that appeared and disappeared, of Junction 7, of other drivers who'd encountered what she had. She found nothing official. But in trucker forums buried in threads about strange experiences, she found oblique references. Drivers who'd gone missing on Nevada highways, later found sitting in their trucks catatonic, staring straight ahead. trucks abandoned perfectly intact on remote stretches, drivers never located. Patricia Sullivan continued driving, but she changed her routes to avoid Highway 95 through that section of Nevada. She still drives nights, still goes by Night Owl on the CB. But now when she hears strange signals, voices that don't quite sound human, messages that repeat without variation, she changes channels and drives faster. Because Junction 7 is still out there, still calling drivers to stop, to choose a truck, to join the eternal parking lot. Patricia escaped, but she knows how close she came to becoming one of those frozen figures sitting behind the wheel forever, neither alive nor dead, just stopped. She still hears the voice sometimes, breaking through on her CB. Junction 7, repeat, Junction 7. When it happens, Patricia responds the same way every time. Night Owl passing through, not stopping. And she drives on, into the darkness, where the highways connect and split, where rest areas appear and disappear, where Junction 7 waits for drivers who don't know enough to keep moving. Story 5. The Cargo That Moved. Raymond Torres had specialized in hazmat transport for 12 years. Chemical compounds, industrial solvents, medical waste, anything that required special licensing and careful handling. The pay was excellent, and Raymond took pride in his perfect safety record. In August of 2024, that record mattered more than he could have known. The pickup was at a chemical plant outside Wilmington, Delaware. The manifest listed the cargo as experimental polymers being transported to a disposal facility in western Pennsylvania. Standard hazmat protocols applied. Placards on the trailer, special handling procedures, designated routes that avoided populated areas. The plant manager who oversaw the loading seemed distracted, kept checking his watch, rushed through the paperwork. Raymond noticed but didn't comment. People were always anxious around hazmat cargo. The shipping containers were standard 55-gallon drums, sealed and labeled according to regulations. 40 drums total, properly secured in his trailer. Raymond departed Wilmington at 4 p.m., heading west toward Pennsylvania. The route took him through rural areas as required for hazmat transport. The weather was clear, traffic light, everything routine. 2 hours into the drive, Raymond heard a sound from his trailer. A thump, like something shifting. He checked his mirrors, watched the road for signs of swaying or instability. Everything looked normal. Probably just cargo settling despite the load being properly secured. 15 minutes later, another thump. Louder this time. Raymond's instincts kicked in. He pulled over at the next safe location, a wide shoulder on an empty stretch of highway, and climbed down to inspect the trailer. He opened the rear doors, carefully checking the seals first to make sure nothing had breached. The hazmat placards were intact. He swung the doors open and shone his flashlight inside. The drums had moved. Raymond was certain of it. He'd watched them being loaded, had personally verified the tie-down straps. But now the configuration was different. Several drums that had been in the front of the trailer were now in the back. The straps were still tight, still properly secured, but the drums themselves had somehow relocated. Raymond's mouth went dry. That wasn't possible. 55-gallon drums filled with chemicals weighed hundreds of pounds each. They couldn't just move on their own, couldn't relocate while remaining secured by the same straps. He approached the nearest drum carefully. The label was intact. Experimental Polymer Compound XR47. Handle with extreme caution. Below that, hazard symbols for corrosive and toxic materials. Standard stuff. But the drum was warm. Raymond could feel heat radiating from the metal when he held his hand near it. That wasn't right. Polymer compounds shouldn't generate heat on their own. He checked the temperature indicator he kept on his belt. 78 degrees inside the trailer. Normal. Another thump. This time Raymond saw it. One of the drums in the middle row shook just slightly, like something inside had struck the interior wall. He took a step back, then another thump from a different drum, then another. Soon drums throughout the trailer were shaking irregularly with no pattern. Raymond slammed the trailer doors and locked them. His hands were shaking. He pulled out his phone and called the chemical plant in Wilmington. No answer. He tried the disposal facility in Pennsylvania. Voicemail. He tried the emergency number on the shipping manifest. Disconnected. He stood by his truck trying to decide what to do. Calling 911 for advice on hazmat cargo would trigger a massive response. Hazmat teams, road closures, maybe evacuation of nearby areas. If this was just cargo settling in an unusual way, he'd face enormous scrutiny and potential liability. But if something was actually wrong with the cargo, if those drums contained something dangerous that was becoming unstable, every second mattered. Another sound from the trailer. Not a thump this time, but a scraping like metal dragging across metal. Raymond made his decision. He climbed into his cab and started driving toward the nearest facility that could handle hazmat cargo safely. According to his GPS, there was an industrial park 40 miles ahead with proper equipment and trained personnel. The sounds from the trailer increased. Thumping became constant, punctuated by scraping and what sounded like liquid sloshing. Raymond drove faster, pushing the speed limit, his eyes flicking constantly to his mirrors. The trailer looked stable, wasn't swaying or showing signs of shifted weight, but the sounds were getting louder. Then his CB radio crackled. Voice, distorted, wrong-sounding, spoke. "Driver of hazmat vehicle, you need to stop, immediately." Raymond keyed his microphone. "Who is this? Identify yourself. Your cargo is not what you were told. Stop the vehicle and evacuate. Walk at least 1 mile away. Do not look back. I'm transporting this cargo to a proper facility. Who is this?" Raymond's mind raced. How did anyone know what he was carrying? Hazmat transport information wasn't broadcast on CB frequencies. "The facility you're heading to cannot help. Nothing can help. The drums are opening. You have maybe 10 minutes. Stop. Evacuate. Run." Raymond checked his trailer in the mirror. The doors were still closed, still sealed, but he could swear the trailer was moving slightly, bulging outward, as if something inside was pressing against the walls. "What's in the drums?" Raymond demanded. "What am I really carrying?" Static answered him. When the voice returned, it was barely comprehensible through interference. "Not polymer, not chemical. They told you polymer because no other way to transport. Needed a driver who wouldn't ask questions. Needed the cargo to reach minimum distance from the plant before." The transmission cut off completely. Raymond's trailer shuddered, hard enough that he felt it in his cab. He glanced in his mirror and saw something that made his blood freeze. The trailer walls were bulging rhythmically like something breathing, and the temperature gauge on his dashboard, which monitored the trailer interior, was climbing. 80 degrees, 90, 100. Whatever was in those drums was generating serious heat. Raymond's training kicked in. Overheating hazmat cargo could mean chemical reactions, could mean pressure building toward rupture. He needed to stop, needed to cool the cargo, needed to call for emergency response. He pulled over, grabbed his fire extinguisher and emergency cooling packs, and ran to the back of the trailer. The metal doors were hot to the touch. He unlocked them anyway, prepared to use the extinguisher if he saw flames. The doors exploded outward. Raymond was thrown backward, landing hard on the asphalt. Smoke poured from the trailer, thick and purple-tinged. Through the smoke, Raymond saw the drums. They were split open, not from external damage, but from the inside out, like something had burst through the walls. And something was emerging. Raymond's mind struggled to process what he was seeing. Shapes dark and fluid, pulling themselves out of the ruptured drums, not liquid, not solid. Something in between, moving with purpose, flowing across the trailer floor toward the open doors. Raymond scrambled to his feet and ran. Behind him he heard sounds, wet, slithering sounds, and underneath that something that might have been voices speaking in frequencies that hurt to hear. He reached his cab, started the engine, prepared to drive away and leave the trailer behind. But the shapes were fast. They flowed from the trailer onto the road, spreading outward, growing larger as they moved. Raymond saw them in his mirrors, dark masses that seemed to absorb light, that moved against the laws of physics, flowing uphill, spreading in directions that didn't match the wind or gravity. One mass reached his cab. It touched the metal, and the metal screamed, actually made a sound like shrieking as it began to corrode, to dissolve, eaten away by whatever the substance was. Raymond punched the accelerator. His truck lurched forward, but the connection to the trailer held him back. He couldn't drive with the trailer attached, not while those things were on it. Raymond grabbed his emergency toolkit, jumped down, and ran to the trailer hitch. The dark masses were spreading across his trailer, consuming it, breaking it down into components and then into constituent elements. Raymond could see the metal simply ceasing to exist where the masses touched it. His hands shook as he worked the hitch release. The safety chains fought him, stuck, precious seconds wasted. The masses were flowing down the trailer toward his cab, 10 feet away. 5 feet. The hitch released. Raymond threw himself back into his cab and drove, leaving the trailer behind. In his mirrors, he watched the dark masses completely envelope the trailer. Within seconds, there was nothing left. The trailer, the drums, everything was gone, consumed, broken down into... what? Atoms? Energy? Raymond didn't know. The masses spread across the highway, growing, combining into larger forms. Raymond drove faster, putting distance between himself and whatever he'd been carrying. He grabbed his phone, dialed 911, reported a hazmat emergency, gave his location. The dispatcher's questions blurred together. Raymond just kept repeating the location, kept saying they needed to evacuate the area, kept driving. When he finally looked back, the masses had disappeared. The highway behind him looked normal. No signs of the trailer, no evidence of what had happened. Just empty road. Raymond pulled over, his entire body shaking. He sat in his cab, trying to breathe, trying to understand what he'd seen. Police arrived within 20 minutes, then hazmat teams, then men in suits who didn't identify which agency they represented. They questioned Raymond for hours, asked about the cargo, about the loading process, about everything he'd seen. They took his truck for examination. They took his logs, his shipping documents, his phone. Raymond was released with instructions not to discuss the incident. His company called the next day to inform him his services were no longer needed. A settlement was offered, generous enough that Raymond didn't have to work again if he was careful with the money. He signed the non-disclosure agreement. What choice did he have? But he researched. Quietly, carefully, he looked into that chemical plant in Wilmington. It had closed 2 weeks after his pickup. Environmental concerns, according to the Brief News article. The disposal facility in Pennsylvania he'd been heading to didn't exist. The address was an empty lot. Raymond found other drivers through forums, people who'd transported cargo for that same plant. Most wouldn't talk. 2 admitted they'd had similar experiences. Cargo that moved, temperatures that spiked, substances that shouldn't exist. All of them had signed NDAs. All of them had quit driving. Raymond Torres lives in Arizona now, works in a hardware store, as far from long-haul trucking as he could get. But he watches the news for stories about unexplained phenomena, about areas that need sudden evacuation, about places where things disappear without explanation. He wonders how many other drivers are out there, carrying cargo they don't understand, transporting things that shouldn't exist. He wonders what would have happened if those drums had opened while he was in a populated area. What the masses would have done, how far they would have spread, how many people would have been consumed before someone found a way to stop them. If anyone could have stopped them. Most of all, Raymond wonders why they needed a driver. Why they couldn't just transport those drums themselves with their own personnel, under their own security. And the only answer he can come up with terrifies him. Because they needed someone expendable. Someone who would take the cargo far enough from the plant that if something went wrong, the plant itself would be safe. The cargo was always going to open. Raymond was always going to be there when it did. He was part of the experiment or the disposal process or whatever that actually was. And he survived only because he reacted faster than they expected, separated the trailer before the masses could reach his cab. Raymond doesn't drive anymore, won't even get behind the wheel for local errands if he can avoid it. Because somewhere out there, someone is still loading trucks with cargo that moves on its own, with drums that contain things that shouldn't exist. And some driver, not knowing any better, is accepting the job for premium hazmat pay. Story 6. The Town That Repeated. Margaret Foster had been driving trucks for 26 years, mostly regional routes in the Midwest. She knew every town between Chicago and Kansas City, every highway and county road, every good truck stop, and every speed trap. In October of 2023, that knowledge stopped meaning anything. The run was simple. Agricultural equipment from Davenport, Iowa to Columbia, Missouri. Margaret had driven this route dozens of times, usually took Highway 63 south through Iowa and Missouri. She left Davenport at 6 a.m. expecting to arrive by early afternoon. The morning was overcast but dry, good driving weather. Margaret made her usual stop in Ottumwa for fuel and coffee, chatted briefly with another driver she recognized, and continued south. Everything was completely routine until she reached Kirksville, Missouri around 11 a.m. Kirksville was a college town, maybe 20,000 people that sat right on Highway 63. Margaret had stopped there many times for fuel or food. She knew it well, the truck stop on the north side, the Walmart on the south end, the college campus visible from the highway. She drove through without stopping, noting the familiar landmarks. 30 miles south of Kirksville, Margaret's GPS started acting strangely. The map kept recentering, the blue position dot jumping erratically. Then it froze completely. Margaret tried restarting it. The screen went blank, then displayed an error message. Position unknown. She relied on road signs instead. The next town was Macon, about 25 miles ahead. Margaret had been through Macon hundreds of times. She'd know it when she saw it. Except the town she reached wasn't Macon, it was Kirksville. The same truck stop on the north side, the same Walmart, the same college campus. Margaret felt disorientation wash over her. She'd been driving south for 30 miles. There was no way she was back in Kirksville. But the signs confirmed it. Kirksville, population 17,505. The businesses were the same, the streets were the same. Even the people walking on the sidewalks looked like the same individuals she'd seen before. Margaret pulled into the truck stop, her mind reeling. This didn't make sense. She couldn't have gotten turned around. Highway 63 was a straight shot, no confusing intersections, no way to accidentally reverse direction. She checked her compass. She'd been driving south. She was certain of it. Inside the truck stop, Margaret asked the cashier what town this was. Kirksville, the woman answered, looking at Margaret like she was confused. Are you okay? I was just here an hour ago. I drove south. I should be near Macon by now. The cashier frowned. Macon's north of here, honey. You must have gotten turned around. No, Macon is south. Margaret was certain. She'd driven this route countless times. Kirksville, then Macon, then Moberly, then Columbia. That's the route. The cashier pulled out her phone, showed Margaret a map. See? Macon is north, Moberly is north, you've got it backward. But Margaret was looking at the map on the phone and it showed something impossible. According to this map, Kirksville was the southernmost town on Highway 63 in Missouri. Below it, the highway just stopped, ended at Kirksville and didn't continue. This is wrong, Margaret insisted. Highway 63 goes all the way to Columbia. I've driven it 100 times. The cashier pulled back her phone, concern clear on her face. Ma'am, maybe you should rest. Have you been driving a long time? Maybe you're confused about which route you're on. Margaret left the truck stop, her hands shaking. She sat in her cab, pulled out her own phone, checked her Maps app. It showed the same thing, Highway 63 ending at Kirksville. No Macon below, no Moberly, no Columbia. She called her dispatcher. This is Margaret. I'm having some kind of problem with my GPS. What's wrong? It's showing Highway 63 ending at Kirksville, but it doesn't end here. It goes all the way to Columbia. Silence on the line. Then, Margaret, where are you supposed to be delivering? Columbia, Missouri. Agricultural equipment. I've got the paperwork right here. Hold on, Margaret heard typing. More silence. Margaret, I don't have any record of a delivery to Columbia for you. Your assignment is Davenport to... Hold on, this is weird. The destination just says south on 63. That's it. No specific location. That doesn't make sense. I have paperwork. I loaded the cargo in Davenport this morning. Margaret shuffled through her documents. The delivery order was there, but when she read it more carefully, the destination field was blank. Just south on 63 under route instructions. Margaret, maybe you should come back to base. Something's not right. Which direction is base from here? Margaret asked, her voice tight. North. Davenport is north on 63. Margaret looked at the highway stretching away from Kirksville in both directions, north and south. She started her engine, pulled out of the truck stop, and headed north. Back toward Davenport, back toward something familiar and sane. She drove for 30 miles, watching her odometer carefully, tracking every mile marker. Highway 63 north, just like she'd driven south. The countryside passed by. Farms, small towns, the landscape of central Missouri and Iowa. And then she reached Kirksville again. The same truck stop, the same Walmart, the same college campus, coming from the south this time, but unmistakably Kirksville. Margaret pulled over on the shoulder, her breath coming in gasps. This was impossible. She'd driven north. She'd watched the signs, counted the miles. There was no way she could have somehow turned around and come back from the north. She got out of her truck and looked at the highway. It stretched in both directions, north and south, disappearing into the distance. Normal-looking road, normal traffic, a few cars passing in both directions. Everything appeared completely ordinary. Margaret walked to the edge of the truck stop parking lot and looked at the businesses across the street. They were the same businesses she'd seen before. Same signs, same buildings. She walked into the convenience store next to the truck stop, a different business than the truck stop itself. The clerk was the same person who'd been there when she'd passed through the first time. Margaret was certain. Same face, same clothes, same name tag. "Excuse me," Margaret said. "Have I been in here before, earlier today?" The clerk looked at her. "I don't think so. I just started my shift an hour ago." "What time is it?" "Almost noon." Margaret checked her watch. 11:47 a.m. That was right. She'd first reached Kirksville around 11 Omaze, had driven south for 30 miles, turned around and driven north for 30 miles. An hour had passed. Time was working normally, even if geography wasn't. She went back to her truck and tried driving south again. Same result, 30 miles of highway, different scenery, and then Kirksville appeared again. North or south, it didn't matter. Every road led back to Kirksville. Margaret tried the exits. Kirksville had several: roads leading to the college, roads leading to residential areas, county roads heading east and west. She took an exit at random, drove east for 20 miles on a county road. The landscape changed. Rolling hills, different farms, towns with different names. But eventually the county road intersected with a highway. And when Margaret checked the signs, it was Highway 63. And when she followed it, she was back in Kirksville. She was trapped in some kind of loop, but not a time loop. Time continued forward normally. A geographical loop with Kirksville at the center. No matter which direction she drove, she ended up back at the same town. Other drivers came and went from the truck stops. Margaret watched them carefully. They didn't seem concerned. They fueled up, bought food, and drove away. North or south, apparently not noticing that every direction led back to the same place. Or maybe they didn't loop. Maybe it was only Margaret. She approached another trucker, a man fueling his rig. "Excuse me, where are you headed?" "Kansas City," he said. "Why?" "Which way is Kansas City from here?" He pointed south. "Down 63 about 3 hours. You going that way?" "I've been trying. I keep ending up back here." The man looked at her strangely. "Maybe check your GPS." "My GPS doesn't work anymore." Margaret felt desperation rising. "Please, just tell me, have you been through here before? Do you always come back to Kirksville?" "Lady, I come through Kirksville maybe once a month. It's just a town on the highway. I don't know what you're talking about." He finished fueling and drove away. South on 63 toward Kansas City, apparently. Though Margaret knew he'd just end up in Kirksville again. Except maybe he wouldn't. Maybe the loop was specific to her. Margaret sat in her cab as afternoon turned to evening. She watched the sunset, watched the streetlights come on, watched businesses close and the town settle into night. Other trucks came and went. The world continued normally around her while she sat trapped in Kirksville's impossible geography. She tried calling people, her dispatcher, other drivers she knew, her sister in Minnesota. Every call went to voicemail or resulted in confusion about where she was and what was wrong. No one seemed to understand the problem. When she tried to explain that Kirksville was repeating, that she couldn't leave, they suggested she rest or see a doctor. Around midnight, Margaret tried again. She drove north on Highway 63, watching her odometer, counting mile markers, determined to drive until something changed, until she broke out of whatever this was. At the 30-mile mark, Kirksville appeared ahead. But, this time, something was different. The town was dark. No streetlights, no businesses lit up, no traffic lights. Just dark buildings and empty streets. Margaret drove slowly through, her headlights illuminating storefronts and houses that looked abandoned. The truck stop was dark, too. Margaret pulled in anyway, climbed down and tried the door. Locked. She peered through the windows. Empty inside. Not just no people, but no merchandise on the shelves, no equipment behind the counter. Just an empty building that looked like it had been abandoned for years. Margaret got back in her truck, fear now overtaking confusion. She drove south through the darkened town. No other vehicles, no signs of life. Just buildings and streetlights that didn't work. She left the town heading south, and the landscape was different this time. The road deteriorated, fewer lane markings, more potholes, trees growing closer to the highway. Like she was driving into the past or into decay. After 10 miles, Margaret saw lights ahead. Another town. Please let it be Macon, she thought. Let this be over. It was Kirksville again. But not dark this time. Lit up, active, looking exactly as it had during the day. Margaret checked her watch. 1:15 a.m. She pulled into the same truck stop she'd stopped at earlier. Inside, the cashier was the same woman from that morning. Margaret approached the counter. "What time did you start your shift?" "About an hour ago," the woman said. Midnight shift. Can I help you with something? Have you seen me before? Have I been in here today? The woman studied Margaret's face. I don't think so. Should I have? Margaret bought coffee she didn't want and sat in her truck trying to think. The town was repeating but differently each time. Sometimes it was day, sometimes night. Sometimes the same people, sometimes empty. The geography was looping, but time and details were changing. She was approaching this wrong, Margaret realized. She'd been thinking of this as a problem to escape, a trap to break out of. But maybe it wasn't a trap. Maybe it was something else. She pulled out the delivery instructions again, read them more carefully in the dome light of her cab. South on 63. That was all it said. Not delivered to Columbia, just south on 63. Instructions to drive, not to arrive. What if the cargo wasn't meant to be delivered anywhere? What if the point was the driving itself? Margaret went to her trailer, unlocked it, and opened the doors for the first time since loading. The cargo was there, crates marked as agricultural equipment. She pried open the nearest crate. Empty. The crate was empty. Margaret opened another crate, also empty. She checked them all. Every single crate in her trailer was empty. There was no cargo. There never had been. She'd been hired to drive an empty trailer south on Highway 63, to a destination that didn't exist, on a road that looped back to Kirksville endlessly. Margaret closed her trailer and sat on the rear bumper, her mind racing. This was deliberate. Someone had set this up. The fake delivery, the impossible geography, the loop. But why? What was the purpose? The answer came as the sun started rising over Kirksville for what Margaret calculated was the third time. She wasn't trapped in the loop. She was the loop, or rather her driving was creating it, sustaining it. As long as she drove, Kirksville would repeat. If she stopped driving, stopped following the instructions, maybe it would stop. Margaret climbed into her cab, but she didn't start the engine. She sat there as morning came fully, as the town woke up around her, as traffic started moving on Highway 63. She sat for hours, refusing to drive, refusing to follow the instructions to go south on 63. By noon, things started changing. The traffic decreased. The people walking on sidewalks moved slower, less purposefully. Businesses didn't open. By afternoon, Kirksville was silent again. By evening, it was dark, but not the nighttime darkness from before. This was a deeper darkness, like the town was fading. Margaret waited. She didn't drive. She watched as Kirksville slowly dissolved around her. Buildings becoming translucent, streets fading, the highway itself growing indistinct. By midnight, she was sitting in her truck in the middle of an empty field. No town, no road, no signs of civilization. Just grass and darkness, and her truck somehow perched on ground that had no right to support it. Her GPS flashed back to life. The map showed Highway 63 stretching normally north and south. Columbia was south, 200 miles away. Davenport was north, 100 miles. Normal geography, normal routes. Margaret started her engine and drove south. The highway was there now, real and solid. She passed through Macon, then Moberly, then small towns she recognized. Everything was as it should be. At 2 a.m. she reached Columbia, even though her delivery address didn't exist and her cargo didn't exist. She called her dispatcher from a well-lit truck stop. "This is Margaret. I'm in Columbia. What do I do with this empty trailer?" "Empty?" "Margaret, you're carrying agricultural equipment." "There's nothing in the trailer. It's been empty the whole time." Silence then. "Hold on." More typing. "Margaret, I'm showing your load was delivered successfully to Columbia. Someone signed for it 3 hours ago." "That's impossible. I just got here, and the trailer is empty." "I don't know what to tell you. According to our system, you delivered on time, cargo verified, payment processed. Drive back to base empty. We'll figure out what happened." Margaret drove back to Davenport, returned the empty trailer, and submitted her logs. No one mentioned Kirksville. No one asked why her GPS had stopped working or why she'd taken so long for a simple delivery. The job was marked complete, payment deposited, everything normal. Except Margaret remembered. She remembered Kirksville repeating, remembered the empty cargo, remembered sitting in that field watching a town dissolve around her. She had no explanation for it, no way to understand what had happened or why. She took a week off, then 2 weeks, then she quit. Margaret Foster works at a library now in Davenport, shelving books and helping patrons, never traveling more than 10 miles from her apartment. She's fine with that. But sometimes she drives past the entrance to Highway 63 and she wonders if Kirksville is still there, if it's waiting for another driver to accept a delivery to nowhere, to drive an empty trailer south on a highway that loops back on itself. If the town repeats for everyone, or if it was specific to her, some quirk of geography or reality that locked onto Margaret Foster specifically. She'll never know. She'll never drive that highway again. Because some loops, once you break free, you don't go back to test whether they're still there. Story 7. The Mirror Truck. Thomas Brennan had been an independent owner-operator for 19 years, running whatever loads paid well and fit his schedule. He preferred overnight drives on empty highways where he could make good time without traffic. In January of 2024, that preference led him to accept a late-night run from Minneapolis to Rapid City, carrying industrial parts. He departed Minneapolis at 10:01 p.m., planning to drive straight through the night and arrive by morning. The route took him west on I-90 through Minnesota and into South Dakota. Cold night, clear skies, roads mostly empty. Perfect conditions. Around 1 a.m., somewhere in eastern South Dakota, Thomas noticed another truck in his mirrors. Semi-trailer like his, maintaining the same speed, staying about a quarter-mile back. Nothing unusual about that. Trucks often ended up pacing each other on long, empty highways. But as Thomas drove, the truck behind him matched his every move. When Thomas changed lanes, the other truck changed lanes. When Thomas sped up, it sped up. When he slowed down, it slowed down. Always maintaining the same distance, always matching his movements exactly. Thomas keyed his CB. "Hey, driver behind me on westbound 90, you're making me nervous with that following. Want to pass?" No response. The truck remained a quarter-mile back. Thomas tried again. "Westbound truck, this is the rig you're following. You got your ears on?" Silence on the CB. Not even static, just nothing. Thomas decided to test this. He took the next exit, a random off-ramp leading to a small town. In his mirrors, the truck followed, maintaining that exact quarter-mile distance. Thomas drove through the sleeping town, turned onto a side street, looped around a gas station, and got back on the highway heading west. The truck followed every turn, never getting closer, never falling farther behind. Quarter-mile distance. Exact. Thomas felt unease creeping into alarm. He sped up, pushing 80 miles per hour. The truck behind him accelerated to match. He slowed to 50. The truck slowed. He changed lanes repeatedly. The truck mirrored every movement. He grabbed his phone, tried to get a photo of the truck in his mirror. The phone's camera wouldn't focus properly. Every photo came out blurred, like the truck behind him was somehow out of phase with reality. Thomas called a friend, another driver he knew was running the northern routes. "Hey, it's Thomas. You anywhere near I-90 in South Dakota?" "Nah, I'm in Wisconsin tonight. What's up?" "There's a truck following me. Been behind me for an hour, matches every move I make. It's freaking me out." "Maybe he's just going the same direction?" "No, it's deliberate. I've tested it. He's copying me exactly." "What's the truck look like?" Thomas studied his mirror. "That's the thing. I can't really see it clearly. It's like looking at a truck through fog, except there's no fog. Pull over, let him pass. Yeah, good idea. Thomas took the next exit, pulled into a rest area. The truck followed him off the highway but didn't pull into the rest area. Instead, it stopped on the shoulder just before the rest area entrance, quarter-mile away exactly. Thomas sat in the rest area parking lot watching the truck in the distance. It was hard to see clearly, even though there were lights at the rest area that should have illuminated it. The truck seemed to blur when he looked directly at it, becoming clearer only in his peripheral vision. After 10 minutes, Thomas decided to try something. He got out of his truck and started walking toward the other vehicle. If the driver was following him, fine. Thomas would confront him directly, figure out what this was about. As he walked, the distance to the truck didn't seem to change. Thomas walked for what felt like several minutes, but the truck remained the same distance away. He stopped, confused. He'd definitely covered ground. The rest area was now far behind him. But the truck ahead hadn't gotten any closer. Thomas turned and looked back at his own truck in the rest area. It was a quarter-mile away. The exact same distance as the truck ahead. He was somehow standing equidistant between them. Fear flooded through Thomas. This wasn't just a truck following him. This was something impossible, something wrong with the fundamental nature of distance or space or reality. He ran back toward his truck, and this time the distance closed normally. He reached his rig, climbed inside, locked the doors. The truck on the shoulder was still there. Thomas started his engine, pulled out of the rest area, and merged back onto the highway. The truck pulled onto the highway behind him. Quarter-mile distance. Perfect matching. Thomas drove faster, trying to build distance. 90 miles per hour, faster than safe, but he needed to test this. The truck matched him. He slammed on his brakes, slowing to 40. The truck matched him. There was no delay, no reaction time. The truck behind him moved in perfect synchronization with his own movements. Then Thomas noticed something new. His fuel gauge was dropping faster than it should. He'd started with 3/4 of a tank. Now it showed half. But he'd only driven about 70 miles, should have burned maybe 1/8 of a tank at most. He checked his odometer. The numbers were rolling backward. As he watched, the miles counted down instead of up. Thomas's mind reeled. The odometer should show increasing miles traveled. Instead, it was decreasing, like he was driving backward through distance. In his mirror, the truck was clearer now. Thomas could make out more details. It looked exactly like his truck. Same make, same model, same color scheme. Even the same company logo on the cab. It was like looking at a reflection of his own vehicle, but not quite a reflection. The truck behind him was reversed, mirror-imaged. Details that should be on the left were on the right. The driver's side was on the wrong side. Thomas felt reality starting to slip. This wasn't just someone following him. This was some kind of duplicate, some mirror version of himself in his truck, traveling the same route in a way that defied normal physics. He tried the CB again. If you're really me, if you're somehow another version of me, respond. Tell me what's happening. The CB crackled. A voice came through. Thomas's voice, but distorted like it was coming from underwater. You're in the mirror. I'm on the outside. You need to break through. How? Thomas gripped the CB microphone so hard his knuckles were white. How do I break through? Stop mirroring. Do something I wouldn't do. Make a choice that breaks the pattern. Thomas tried to understand. If the truck behind him was mirroring his movements, matching him perfectly, then he needed to do something unexpected, something that would break that synchronization. He saw a crossroad ahead. At the last possible moment, Thomas jerked his wheel, taking the exit without signaling, without slowing down properly. His truck swayed dangerously, tires screaming, but he made the turn. In his mirror, the other truck missed the exit. For the first time, it didn't match his movement. It continued west on I-90 while Thomas veered off onto the crossroad. Relief flooded through him. He'd broken free. He'd escaped the mirror truck, but then he looked at his GPS. It still showed him on I-90, heading west. The blue dot on the screen didn't match where he actually was. Thomas looked around. The crossroad he'd taken was gone. He was back on I-90, heading west. And in his mirror, the truck was there, quarter-mile back, matching his movements. The CB crackled. "That was good. You almost broke through. Try again." Thomas felt despair settling over him. How many times had he already tried this? How many times had he thought he'd escaped only to end up back on I-90 with the mirror truck following? He checked his fuel gauge, now showing a quarter tank. His odometer was still counting backward. And when Thomas looked at his hands on the steering wheel, he saw that his left hand was where his right hand should be. He was reversed, mirror-imaged. He wasn't being followed by a mirror version of himself. He was the mirror version. The truck behind him was real, and Thomas was the reflection, trying desperately to break out of the mirror and return to reality. Every time he tried to escape, every move he made, the real Thomas in the real truck was doing the opposite. Thomas in the mirror could see the real world, could almost touch it but couldn't break through. He was trapped in a reflected version of I-90 that existed parallel to the real highway. The CB voice, his own voice, spoke again. "I'm sorry. I don't know how this happened. I don't know how to get you out." Thomas realized with sick certainty that the voice was lying. The real Thomas knew exactly how this happened. He'd done it deliberately somehow, creating a mirror version of himself too. What? Take his place? Share the burden of driving? Explore what it was like to split himself across realities? Thomas tried to respond, but his own voice wouldn't work properly. The words came out reversed, incomprehensible. He was losing himself, becoming more reflection than reality, more mirror than substance. The road ahead split. I-90 continued west, but a branch highway curved south. The mirror road Thomas was traveling on mirrored this split, but reversed. His branch curved north. Thomas took the north branch, watched as the other truck took the south branch. The distance between them grew. For a moment, Thomas felt hope. They were separating, heading different directions. Maybe this would break the mirroring, free him from this parallel existence. But the distance between the trucks stabilized at 1/4 mile, even though they were traveling on different roads. Thomas could still see the other truck in his mirror, could still see it matching his movements despite the roads diverging. The reflection was no longer dependent on actual spatial proximity. It was something deeper, something fundamental about Thomas's existence being split. He drove for hours, trying different things, taking random exits, stopping abruptly, reversing direction. Nothing worked. Every attempt to break free resulted in the same outcome. Back on I-90, mirror truck behind him, distance unchanging. As dawn approached, Thomas noticed the landscape becoming less distinct. The buildings and trees and terrain features were blurring, losing detail, like they were fading or like Thomas's ability to perceive them was diminishing. He was becoming more reflection, less real, his connection to the physical world weakening. The CB crackled one last time. "I'm sorry. I'll remember you. I'll remember I did this." Then silence. The mirror truck behind him vanished. Thomas was alone on the highway, but alone in a way that was worse than being followed. He was alone because he was becoming nothing. A reflection without a source. A mirror image with no original to reflect. The sunrise came, but Thomas barely saw it. The light passed through him instead of illuminating him. He looked at his hands, translucent now, fading. His truck was fading too, becoming ghostly, insubstantial. Thomas Brennan didn't arrive in Rapid City. His truck was found 3 days later, parked at a rest area on I-90 in South Dakota, empty. No signs of Thomas, no indications of where he'd gone. His logs showed normal progress to that point, nothing unusual. His cargo was intact. Search teams looked for him. Dogs tracked his scent to the edge of the rest area parking lot, then lost it. Helicopters scanned the area. Volunteers checked every building and culvert for miles. Thomas had simply disappeared, but drivers on I-90 through South Dakota sometimes report a truck in their mirrors, keeping quarter-mile distance, matching their movements, never getting closer or farther away. Most drivers think it's just another truck going the same direction. They don't notice the reverse details, don't realize they're seeing a mirror version until they try to photograph it and their cameras won't focus properly. The real Thomas Brennan, the one who didn't become a reflection, completed the delivery to Rapid City. He quit driving long haul after that. Couldn't handle the guilt, couldn't stop checking his mirrors for that quarter-mile-away truck that he knew was his other self, trapped in the mirror, fading slowly into nothing. He never explained what he'd done or how he'd split himself. Some experiments shouldn't be spoken about. Some mistakes can't be undone. Some reflections, once separated from their originals, can never find their way back. And on I-90 in South Dakota, a mirror truck still drives. Empty, translucent, barely real. Following other drivers, trying to match them perfectly, hoping that someday the right synchronization will break the mirror and let Thomas Brennan come home. Story 8. The way station that weighed wrong. Victor Ramirez had been driving commercially for 14 years, running loads up and down the West Coast. He knew every way station, every inspection procedure, every regulation. In February of 2023, that knowledge became useless. The load was routine, packaged foods from Sacramento to Portland. Victor departed Sacramento at 3 p.m., taking I-5 north through California into Oregon. The cargo weight was legal, properly distributed, his truck maintained perfectly. He'd passed dozens of weigh stations with this exact setup. No reason to expect problems. Around 9 p.m., Victor approached a weigh station in Northern California. The open "All Trucks Must Enter" sign was lit. Victor slowed and pulled onto the scale platform. Standard procedure. This station used automatic systems. Drive onto the scale, wait for the green light, continue if legal weight, pull to the inspection bay if there was an issue. Victor stopped on the scale and waited. The digital display usually showed weight within a few seconds. But this time the display flickered, showing numbers that changed rapidly. 78,450 pounds, then 12,300 pounds, then 156,000 pounds, then numbers that couldn't possibly be right. Negative weights, weights in the millions, symbols that weren't even numbers. The display finally stabilized. 0 pounds. Victor frowned. That was impossible. His truck and cargo together weighed around 75,000 pounds. There was no way the scale could read 0. He waited for instructions, either a green light to continue or a signal to pull over for inspection. Neither came. The scale just displayed 0 pounds, and nothing else happened. After 5 minutes, Victor keyed his CB. "Anyone else at this weigh station? I'm stuck on the scale with a bad reading." No response. Victor looked around. The weigh station building was lit, but he couldn't see anyone inside. No other trucks were in the inspection bays or in the queue behind him. The parking lot was empty. Strange for a busy stretch of I-5 on a weeknight. Victor climbed down from his cab, intending to walk to the building and find an attendant. As soon as his boots touched the ground, he felt something wrong. The ground didn't feel solid. It had a spongy quality, like walking on foam. Each step compressed the pavement slightly, then sprang back. He walked to the scale platform and looked at his truck. It sat normally on the scale, tires properly contacting the surface. But when Victor looked directly at the truck, it seemed lighter. Not visually lighter in color, but lighter in substance, like it weighed less than it should. He returned to his cab and tried to drive forward off the scale. The engine responded, the wheels turned, but the truck didn't move. Victor pressed harder on the accelerator. The engine roared, the tachometer climbed, but there was no forward motion. It was like the truck was fixed in place, or like it had lost the ability to interact with the ground properly. Victor put the truck in park and tried the CB again. "Way station personnel, I need assistance. My truck is stuck on the scale," a voice responded, but it wasn't a normal CB transmission. It came from all around him, from the air itself. "Weight insufficient, cannot proceed." "What do you mean, weight insufficient?" "My truck weighs 75,000 pounds. Current weight 0 pounds. Weight required to proceed, variable. Please add weight." Victor's mind raced. This didn't make sense. Was it some kind of malfunction? A bizarre prank? "How do I add weight? My cargo is already loaded. Weight is not mass. Weight is significance. Significance is insufficient. Add weight." Victor felt reality tilting. This wasn't a conversation about his truck's physical weight anymore. It was something else. Something that used the language of weight but meant something different. "I don't understand what you want from me," Victor said to the air, to the voice that came from nowhere. "Your cargo weighs nothing. Your truck weighs nothing. You weigh nothing. Travel requires weight. Explain your weight. Justify your passage." Victor tried to process this. "Justify my passage? I'm a truck driver. I'm delivering cargo. That's my job." "Job is not weight. Job is activity. Weight is meaning. What is the meaning of your journey? What is the significance of your passage through this space?" This was insane. Victor was talking to a weigh station that wanted philosophical justification for his trip instead of actual weight measurements. He tried the practical approach. "My cargo is food. Food for grocery stores in Portland. People need food. That's significant." The voice was silent for a long moment, then, "Food significance. Minimal. Abundant food exists. Your specific cargo adds negligible meaning to the total food system. Weight added, 0.3 pounds. Total weight, 0.3 pounds, insufficient to proceed." Victor felt frustration building. "Fine. The cargo isn't significant, but I need to deliver it because that's my contract. That's how I earn money. That's how I support my family." Contract significance minimal. Contracts are abstractions. Money is abstraction. Family support is derivative function. Weight added, 0.1 pounds. Total weight, 0.4 pounds, insufficient to proceed. Victor's frustration turned to anger. "What the hell do you want from me? What counts as significant enough weight?" Weight is truth. Weight is irreplaceable uniqueness. Weight is that which cannot be substituted. What do you carry that cannot be replaced? Victor thought desperately. His cargo was just food, completely replaceable. His job was just a job. Thousands of other drivers could do it. His truck was just a vehicle. What did he have that was irreplaceable? "Memories," Victor said finally. "I carry memories, my experiences, my history. No one else has those exact memories. They can't be replaced." Memories, shared patterns. Similar memories exist in millions of minds. Your specific memories are variations on common themes. Uniqueness minimal. Weight added 2.7 pounds. Total weight 3.1 pounds. Insufficient to proceed. Victor felt despair creeping in. How could he prove his significance, his weight to this incomprehensible system? What did any person have that was truly unique, truly irreplaceable? He thought about his daughter, 7 years old, growing up while he spent weeks on